Congressman Jason Crow said today in response to these new actions by the president that President Trump has, quote, learned nothing from decades of endless war. Congressman Crow says, quote, I went to war 3 times for this country. Quote, working class folks will pay the price of his military adventurism. Americans are sick of it, and I'm sick of it. Joining us now is Colorado Congressman Jason Crow. He is a veteran of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. He serves on the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Rachel.
Let me ask you to just expand on that statement. How'd you learn about this, and what's your take on what the president is trying to achieve with this war?
Yeah, well, here we go again. You know, as you just pointed out, I learned about this when I woke up and opened up my phone and looked at Twitter, right, which has its own set of problems, the fact that Congress wasn't engaged and involved. But listen, my statement, I think, captures the sentiment of tens of millions of working class Americans who have seen 20 years of endless conflict, trillions of dollars spent, thousands of American lives. And you know who wins? The defense companies win, the oil companies win, the elites and the billionaires win, and the working class folks that I grew up with, that I went to war with, we're left holding the bag. And this is the same thing, right, over and over again. And how magnanimous of Donald Trump to get up there last night and say, you know, tough stuff happens in war, and maybe there are going to be some Americans that will die, but that's a cost I'm willing to take. Really? That's a cost he's willing to take? Because last time I checked, it wasn't him or his kids or his donors' kids or the other elites in the White House that are having to jump into planes or pick up rifles or are sitting here in military bases around the Middle East being bombed right now. They shift that burden onto the rest of us.
Strategically, the question that emerged from the debacles of the Iraq and Afghanistan war, the most potent questions that were never able to be answered by any U.S. government, by any U.S. president, was, how does this end? Strategically, do you understand how this ends, what the United States is both trying to do and whether what they're doing gets us anywhere closer to those aims?
Of course I don't, right? I mean, the rationale for this changes by the hour, right? And sometimes in the same speech, they give different rationale. It's going to prevent them from having a nuclear weapon. It's regime change. It's to protect Americans against some unnamed, undefined imminent threat that, you know, by the way, as a member of the Intelligence and Armed Services Committee, I'm not aware of, and they haven't briefed us on. So will the real rationale for this please stand up? But we can talk all we want about notification and debating and war powers and resolutions. And I think a lot of Americans just kind of get, glazed eyes when they talk about the procedure. Here's why the procedure and that stuff is important to me as somebody who went and had to fight these wars in the past. It's about accountability. There has to be an accountability loop here. And the reason why we went to war, I think, for 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan is because we stopped taking votes on it. We stopped debating it. The trillions of dollars that we spent was largely debt financing. Nobody was held accountable. And less than 2% of Americans had to actually go off and fight the war. So for me, it's important that we actually have these debates.
That often happens in war. But we're doing this not for now. We're doing this for the future. And it is a noble mission.
Do you fear that that could happen as a result of this?
Well, listen, I'm just damn furious. The man's a 5-time draft dodger. He's an elite. And I went to war. I fought with working class kids. They're the ones that do the fighting and dying. And how amazing of Donald Trump to say, that often happens in war. And that's a cost he's willing to take. Great for him. It's not his kids. It's not his family. It's not his billionaire donors who are having to go off and do it. It's kids in towns across the country that have to pick up the guns, jump into the planes and helicopters and get it done. And it's kids that are sitting there at military bases in Bahrain, like your video is showing now, who are sitting in bunkers right now because Donald Trump is willing to take a chance with their lives. This is everything that's wrong with our national security infrastructure and our policies, right? Elites make decisions. They talk tough. They pound their chests. And then everybody else is left holding the bag. Enough is enough. right? Let's actually have a conversation about what is in our interests, what we're willing to do with American lives, what we're willing to do with American taxpayer dollars. And it's Congress that is supposed to have that responsibility, right? I'm not interested in process arguments, but what I am interested in is accountability. And the Constitution put that accountability on Congress to take the votes, be held responsible for it, and to go home and sit in high school gymnasiums and Rotary clubs and forums around the country and to be held accountable for those decisions.
So you want to see a congressional vote on this?
Heck yeah, I do. I think we should go back to D.C. right now. I'm willing to jump on a plane in an hour and go home and take up a vote on this, because that is what the American people deserve, right? They deserve accountability. They deserve to know who is willing to take chances with their national security, their kids' lives, their taxpayer dollars. Let's take the vote. I want names.
Do you believe the United States is at war with Iran? Would you classify this as that right now?
I do think this was an act of war, and I think it was unconstitutional, right? And again, you can talk about the Constitution, we can talk about process, all well and good, but for me, it's about accountability. The reason why we need to take the vote and why Congress needs to be held responsible is because we need to tally it up, take the votes. People need to know where folks stand, right? For 20 years, we went to war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and there were very few votes, if any, for years. We financed it with debt that's now sitting on our...
This is from Senator Tim Kaine, who's a senior Democrat who is on the Armed Services Committee. Senator Kaine writing today, quote, "Has President Trump learned nothing from decades of U.S. meddling in Iran and forever wars in the Middle East? Is he too mentally incapacitated to realize that we had a diplomatic agreement with Iran that was keeping its nuclear program in check until he ripped it up during his first term?" Senator Kaine saying today that these strikes on Iran are, quote, "a colossal mistake," and, quote, "a dangerous, unnecessary, and idiotic action." An idiotic action, Senator Tim Kaine calls it. Here's Congressman Jim Himes, who's a member of the Gang of Eight, the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee. He says, quote, "Everything I have heard from the administration before and after these strikes on Iran confirms this is a war of choice with no strategic endgame. It does not appear that Donald Trump has learned the lessons of history." Joining us now is former Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes. Ben, thank you very much for being with us today for this fast developing story. I really appreciate you making time.
Yeah, good to see you, Rachel.
Let me just ask your reaction in general. For me, I would put to you specifically the point that the president is explicitly saying this is a regime change war. This is intended to change out the government of the nation of Iran. What's your reaction to what he's done and why he's saying he's doing it?
Well, you're exactly right, Rachel. I mean, you and I have been talking about Iran for over 15 years, I think. And this was always the scenario that people were concerned about in terms of where conflict between the United States and Iran could go. This is not a limited strike on nuclear targets. This is not intended to kind of coerce the Iranian government into some negotiation. Trump made clear in his words, and they're making clear in their targets, that this is an effort to remove the Iranian regime. What is astonishing to me is not only is this illegal, but it's totally unnecessary. The Iranian regime posed no greater threat to the United States yesterday than it did 2 years ago or 4 years ago or 5 years ago. If anything, it posed less of a threat and was involved in negotiations on the issue that the United States has always seen as the most important security interest that we have, which is the nuclear program. And absent from that bizarre statement last night, in which he kind of casually referenced the potential deaths of U.S. service members, was any notion of what comes after the regime change. You know, he made a call for the Iranian people to rise up, and then what? Because we've seen that even if you decapitate the regime, even if you remove the regime, that often, in the case of Iraq, in the case of Libya, in the case of Afghanistan, leads to civil war. They can drag on and have all manner of unintended consequences, human and geopolitical, and with the cost being borne by the American taxpayer. So we are in a deeply, deeply uncertain point here right now, and we don't need to be here.
In terms of what might happen next, and if we take the Trump administration, I can't believe I'm saying this, if we take them at their word that they are trying for regime change. I mean, if they were trying to make plausible some sort of populist uprising of the Iranian people to take over their government, to throw out the regime, to confront and defeat the domestic security services, and to displace the Ayatollah and his regime.
All Trump has done here is hand the Iranian regime more propaganda. That's it. Everything they have been telling their people about the United States being imperialist now is confirmed to them. You don't have to defend that regime to see the problem. What did Trump and his allies do? They carried out what critics call an illegal bombing of a sovereign country, and supporters, including leaders like Mark Henry, came out defending it as self-defense, even through Israel and the United States struck first. What's interesting is that it probably won't create the kind of internal rebellion inside Iran that some expect. If anything, foreign bombing often pushes people closer to their government, even if they dislike it. People, they see another country attacking them while they haven't related it in the same way. That kind of pressure tends to unify people against an outside force. But what it is clearly doing is dividing Americans. It's splitting people along party lines and along class lines, as some lawmakers have argued. While the political leaders won't be the ones fighting, it will be working class families and their children who face the risk of another Middle East war. Critics say that while this conflict dominates headlines, attentions shift away from other controversies involving Trump. So the real division isn't necessarily inside Iran, it's inside Western countries. People in the United States, Canada, and elsewhere are criticizing their own presidents and prime ministers for backing a war that many ordinary citizens don't support. In that sense, the political fallout is happening at home. And by taking this action, critics argue Trump has reinforced the very image his opponents abroad want to project of him.